Okay, in this video, we are going to be discussing fluids and electrolytes. So this will be part one of our discussion on fluids and electrolytes, and we will cover the fluid compartments in the body, and we will also discuss water balance. And then in part two, we'll go over electrolyte balance and pH, how it's maintained, and some changes in pH and what those are referred to. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we need to discuss is the fluid compartments in the body. And so a lot of this should be kind of familiar and a little bit of a review. So we can divide the fluids in the body into being either intracellular fluid or extracellular fluid. So we're going to talk about each, where they're found, and also some important electrolytes in each. Okay, so let's start with intracellular fluid. So intracellular fluid is found inside of cells, right? So it's inside cells. And this intracellular fluid, the cytosol of the cell, makes up about 2/3 of all of the fluid in the body. All right, so 2/3 of the body's fluids are contained inside of a cell. Okay, so now let's talk about the electrolytes found in that intracellular fluid. So first off, just a reminder of what an electrolyte is. An electrolyte is some sort of compound that dissociates into ions. So electrolytes essentially are ions, right? They are going to be charged. Okay, so they can be either positively charged or they can be negatively charged, all right? And so we'll talk about some examples, right? So these are going to be charged elements, right, or ions. Okay, so with intracellular fluid, let's talk about the major cation, right, in intracellular fluid. And so cations, just as a reminder, they have a positive charge, and then anions have a negative charge. So the major cation in intracellular fluid is going to be potassium, right? So this is the primary one. So it's primarily potassium, which has a positive charge. We know that when we discussed muscles and the nervous system and how they communicate and send electrical signals, that having a high concentration of potassium on the inside of the cell was very important. Okay, so we know that that's in the intracellular fluid. Also, there is going to be a good bit of magnesium, or at least more magnesium intracellularly than would be extracellularly. All right, so those are our cations. And then for our anions, our negatively charged molecules, primarily we are going to see phosphates. Right, so primarily phosphates ions, all right, PO43 minus. All right, those are essential to have intracellularly in a high concentration in order to use for ATP synthesis. So we need that phosphate for ATP synthesis. Okay. And there also would be some negatively charged proteins inside of the cell in that intracellular fluid as well. All right, so that's our intracellular fluid inside of the cells. Now, let's talk about extracellular fluid. And so I'm going to label on this picture over here to the right, our intracellular fluid obviously would be inside of our cells in here, all right? So these are our cells, all right? And we also have some red blood cells. We'll talk about this little blood vessel in a little bit. So we can add on the inside of our cells, we have potassium and we have magnesium. Those are our cations. And for our anions, we have PO43 minus and some proteins, all right, that are going to be negative. We'll just put a little negative up there just so we remember that those are negative. Okay, so now let's talk about our extracellular fluid. And so we can essentially, extracellular fluid covers everything that is outside of the cells, right? So where it is located is outside of the cells. And this is that remaining 1/3 of the body's fluids. But we can also further divide extracellular fluid into being either interstitial fluid or plasma, right? So interstitial fluid is about 80% of the intracellular fluid. Okay, and so interstitial fluid is the fluid found kind of within the tissues and between the tissue cells, right? So on our picture up here, kind of around all of these kind of greenish cells would be that interstitial fluid. Okay, so it would be filling all these spaces around here. All right, so this is in the tissues. Okay, and so that's going to be separate from plasma. So this would make up the remaining 20% of, that should be, extracellular fluid. So this is that remaining 20% of the extracellular fluid, and this is the fluid in blood, right? So plasma, we've talked about that before when we did blood, right? This is the fluid in blood. And so we keep that separate from interstitial fluid, which is in the tissues. Okay, so we have our plasma up here. All right, so now let's talk about the electrolytes in extracellular fluid. And so we're just going to be very general with this, talking about the electrolytes in extracellular fluid, so that'll include plasma and interstitial fluid together. Right, and so we know, and this kind of goes with the potassium that we talked about for intracellular fluid, there's a lot of sodium in extracellular fluid. Okay, so one of our major cations is going to be sodium. Okay, and that's the primary cation. All right, so primarily sodium. There's also going to be a higher concentration of calcium in that extracellular fluid than we would see in intracellular fluid. Right, so there's going to be some calcium as well. And then for anions, we're going to have a high concentration of chlorine, right, or chloride ions. So primarily chloride, Cl minus. And we are also going to have a lot of bicarbonate. Okay. Good, so those are our different fluid compartments. We have intracellular fluid inside of the cells, extracellular fluid outside of the cells, and then there's interstitial fluid in the tissues, right, which is one category of extracellular fluid, and plasma, which is in the blood, is our other category of extracellular fluid. All right, so now let's talk about water balance. And so we know it's important to, be hydrated and maintain, a balance of hydration and water in your body. And so we need to discuss, what exactly that means and how, your body can be affected by dehydration or overhydration. So let's go ahead and get into that. All right, so with water and keeping it balanced, obviously that means that the amount of water you take in should equal the amount of water that you put out. All right, so let's talk about some different kind of sources of taking water in versus losing water. Okay, so water gain, obviously these are ways that we acquire water in our body, and it's typically around 2.5 liters a day. Okay, and this would be from, obviously food you eat contains moisture, you drink water or different fluids, right? So food and drink, that's pretty straightforward. Also, we do get some level of water through the process of cellular respiration. That is a byproduct made during cellular respiration. Right, so those are the three primary sources for gaining water in your body. Okay. All right. And so water loss, that should be generally about equal. So that would be about 2.5 liters as well. And so some different causes for water loss. Obviously, one would be through excretion. So we do lose water in urine. That's pretty logical. There's also a little bit of water in feces. And we know when we sweat, that will obviously be giving off water, right, through sweat. And we do lose water through evaporation. Right, so evaporation. So this could occur in the lungs, as we're breathing, right? There's moisture in the air that we're breathing, and we're exhaling a lot of that moisture into the environment. So we are losing some water through evaporation that way. So in the lungs, as well as through the skin. Right, so part of the skin's function is to kind of help to keep that moisture in, but we do lose some moisture through the skin as well. Okay, and obviously if we are talking about water, we need to review a little bit about osmosis that you learned early on in your anatomy and physiology education. So osmosis, remember, is the movement of water, right? So the movement of water between those fluid compartments that we talked about. Right, so water can move, from intracellular to extracellular fluid or vice versa, and it always will move towards wherever there are more solutes. So more, electrolytes or glucose, more proteins, right? So it always moves towards more solutes. Right, so towards a higher concentration of solutes. Okay, and so that's osmosis, right? So water is constantly moving between compartments depending on solute concentration. All right, the hypothalamus also plays a really important role in water balance in the body. Because it is constantly monitoring osmolarity and blood volume and all these different things that are indicators of hydration and water balance. And then it will act by, activating thirst centers, right? If you need more water, it will stimulate you to feel thirsty, so you will drink more water. Right? And we also know that it can release ADH, very important hormone for water balance, and that will add aquaporins, as we're going to learn about with the urinary system, right? It'll add aquaporins to some of the tubules in your kidney to help you take back water from the urine. All right, so the hypothalamus is also very important for helping with water balance. So let's talk about kind of imbalances in water in your body. Okay, so the first one would be dehydration. Right, I think we're all familiar with what dehydration is. Kind of simply put, right, this is a loss of water. Right, so a loss of water. It could also be a loss of solutes or both. Okay, and so some symptoms of dehydration, the skin would be affected, right? The skin becomes very dry and flushed, meaning red, right? You see some redness with the skin and it's very dry, right? So dry, flushed skin. Dry mouth is definitely a symptom of dehydration. All right, that's your body telling you you need more water, and also a decrease in urine production. So your kidneys are attempting to, retain water for your body, right? So decrease in urine production. Okay, so those are symptoms of dehydration. And so let's talk about some possible causes, right? And so we'll go through kind of the most obvious ones first. So vomiting and diarrhea are definitely causes, especially if they are prolonged over a long period of time, right? So vomiting, diarrhea, right? We lose fluids in that way. Also hemorrhaging, blood loss, right? We are losing that plasma, which is, an important extracellular fluid. So blood loss, right? Sweating, obviously. We can lose water through sweating and become dehydrated that way if you don't replace that water that's lost, and also just not drinking enough water, right? So water deprivation. Okay. And then one other important, thing to remember, especially clinically relating to water loss, is that severe burns, third-degree burns, it is very important to make sure a patient with those kind of burns remains hydrated because you lose that barrier of the skin that helps to keep moisture in. And so people with severe burns end up losing a lot more water and become dehydrated because of that, right? So severe burns. Okay. Now let's talk about the opposite, all right? So overhydration. This is also called hypotonic hydration or water intoxication, all right? So this can be caused, obviously, by drinking a lot of water, all right? So primarily you need to drink a lot of water in a very short period of time. So drinking a lot of water very, very quickly, right? So drinking a lot of water in a short time. All right, and so you're taking in more water than your body can really process, right? And so you end up flooding your body with too much water. This can also, we can see overhydration not just from drinking water, but also when there are problems with the kidney and it's not working properly. So with renal insufficiency, we can see overhydration as well. All right, so overhydration not as commonly seen as dehydration, but it certainly is possible, right? And so, when you're adding all that extra water, if you remember with osmosis, right, your cells will swell. That water will kind of rush into the intracellular fluid where there would be more solutes, and those cells would swell, and you could possibly, damage the cells. And if in particular they're neurons, right, that would be really serious and cause, a lot of problems and hospitalization. Okay, so that's overhydration. All right, so then the last topic for this video, we are going to discuss edema. All right, and so edema specifically relates to an increase in interstitial fluid. And we've talked about this before with our lymphatic chapter and our blood vessels that we discussed. All right, so edema is an increase in interstitial fluid. Right, so that fluid in the tissues. Okay, and so just a reminder of some of the causes of edema. So it can result from an increase in pressure in the veins, right? So an increase in venous pressure. All right, also it can result from poor lymphatic drainage, so your lymph vessels aren't properly draining in interstitial fluid, so decrease in lymph drainage or removal. If your capillaries become more permeable and release more fluid, that will increase that interstitial fluid, causing edema, right? So an increase in capillary permeability. All right, and also it can occur if there's not enough albumin in the plasma. And so remember, albumin helps to hold fluid in the blood vessels and in the blood in that plasma, right? So if there's a decrease in blood albumin, right, we can see edema. Okay. And so a lot of times this decrease in albumin can occur when there's kidney damage. All right, and so that albumin actually escapes from the blood into the urine, right? And so now it's not there retaining that water in the plasma, and we will see edema resulting from that. Okay, so that's it for this video. And so in the next video, we are going to discuss electrolyte balance and acid-base balance, right? So pH. So I will see you guys in the next video.